Hi everyone and welcome. We're joined today by Henry Tillman, the founder of Asia Investment Research Global and the founder of Ayana Research in the UAE. So welcome back to the program.
Always good to be with you, Glenn.
So last time we spoke, it was about China's thorium-powered nuclear reactors, which we discussed would revolutionize nuclear energy with unlimited, cheap, and also clean energy. And I'll add a link to that talk in the description because it's truly a fascinating development. But today, I want to discuss with you more the near-term developments, such as the floating nuclear power plants and the small modular reactor nuclear power plants, which are also changing the energy landscape. Let's start with the floating nuclear power plants, as new deals are being announced in these emerging markets. I thought a good place to start perhaps is if you can describe what they are, these floating nuclear power plants. I guess the purpose of having them, safety, how do they operate, and also where they're actually being installed.
Again, thank you for having me on. We start this where we ended the last one, which is the actual first floating nuclear power plant was created by America, by the U.S. Navy, and was functional in the 60s and 70s, but then decommissioned. So much like thorium, the U.S. led the world in thorium back in the 60s and 70s and stopped it. The U.S. led floating nuclear power plants in the 70s and also stopped it. This one came in 76. So we then wait a long time to 2020 when Russia launches its first floating power plant, FPPs, which is off the coast of northeastern Russia. It's a floating barge. It's roughly 140 meters by 30 meters, 10 meters high. It produces 70 megawatts of power. In this case, it powers a small village or parts of a small village, but it could power, it's only 4,000 people, but it could be much bigger, whether it's difficult to get a connection to the grid. So it can be used for a city or it can be used for a place. So that's the concept behind it. That was in 2020. Since that time, as you probably are aware, the world is really desperate for new energy sources. And much of that shortage of power lies throughout Africa. So Russia has been moving quickly to produce these smaller modular floating nuclear reactors for many African countries. There was a piece in The Independent in middle of May talking about 20 different countries. I won't go over that, but someone could just go to The Independent and look for that study. I think it's 13th of May. But what I do want to talk about is last week we published on how this is happening, not just in Russia, in South Africa, but also in ASEAN. So in Q2, we've seen Rosatom, we're engaged with contracts with Malaysia in floating nuclear power. That's 100 megawatts. This was 70 megawatts in Russia. With Indonesia and with Myanmar. So that's moving into, and I'll talk about a bit of other countries a little later in this discussion. They also signed up floating nuclear power plants and an SMR, a thorium SMR, and mining thorium in Brazil in the last month, and I think to take it one step further, they've also signed a deal with India to build an SMR using thorium. So there's a bridge. It's bridging towards thorium, but it's not there yet. But these are steps on the way to get into thorium. But then again, the concept is safe nuclear power offshore from a energy point of view. So if there's an issue, it's offshore, it's not onshore. It can be moved easily. These are actually manufactured in Russia and delivered to the country. So they control the manufacturing piece and take it delivered to the country. So it can be used any way the country wants to use it, for a project or for part of the country or for a city within the country. So that's the first move to it. And I've heard competitors call this as a low-hanging fruit to building, if you will, a nuclear power capability energy capability across the spectrum. Again, we advise across the entire spectrum. So this is one piece on that in that energy portfolio you'd look at. And it's not just Russia and China, but it's also many other countries involved in the FNP piece. So that's the first step, if you will. But again, I want to make the point, it's not just Russia, which all the press is not covering. It's also ASEAN. It's also Latin American. So it's much broader, and that's, I guess, our first point. But what's really interesting about it is how Russia's packaged this. It's really a turnkey approach. So if you look at the decisions taken by some of the ASEAN countries, which we look at, we see them looking at not only performance capabilities and historical deliverability, which Russia leads, but also the packaging of it. So Russia will underwrite the initial cost of this stuff. So very clever. It's using, if you will, financing or credit to build a relationship, and then they move that as a part of a package. Another part of that package might be we'll want the rights to mine and enrich your uranium. It might also mean something broader to data centers. It might be broader to build into larger facilities. Yes, for Vietnam, for example, it's building into larger power plants. So it's a very clever marketing strategy. And frankly, it's no different from a large bank like a JP Morgan or a Goldman, which will build a relationship off credit and and do such a good job. And I've actually read reports where some of these markets have said we've looked at the Rosatom capabilities, machine of capabilities versus other countries, and they actually outperform. So it's a package of a turnkey approach to these countries. They provide the financing. It's off the balance sheet of the country. Very clever. It's very, very clever. And they are moving as quickly as possible because this whole market, as we're going to talk about here today, is moving so quickly. Russia must move as fast as they can. And these markets, Africa and Asia, are exactly the markets President Putin has been talking about recently in the most recent summit, about saying these are the growth markets of the world. So they're aligned completely with the growth markets of the world. So pretty clever, top-down management, and doing a good job of doing as fast as they can in building this.
You mentioned the term turnkey solutions quite often, and I guess this is one of the advantages that Russia has as not just a leading actor in the nuclear energy market, but I would use even the word dominant, because it does, for countries who haven't got all the know-how and technology, they do offer everything from constructing the nuclear power plants to supplying the fuel, to managing it, and disposing of the, I guess, spent fuel and maintenance. I mean, there's it's nice to have one, I guess, one trade partner who does everything. It does create a very powerful competitive advantage, though.
They've also been very good over the past decade of educating each of these countries, of building an infrastructure of teaching nuclear. Because as you recall from our last conversation, many countries just stopped this completely. So I deal with several countries that just don't have that capability, or big name countries you would know that just are very thin on the capability of understanding this. So you must build that technology at education levels. And Russia's been doing this throughout Africa for years. Yes, and now they're taking it elsewhere in the world. So it's the paucity of skilled people in this sector, because it's closed. I mean, as I mentioned, the U.S. first and the original floating nuclear power plant was decommissioned in 2018. It wasn't that long ago, right? And suddenly, everyone's reversing it. I think the key I want to make is that much as while Africa is dealing with trying to get infrastructure and enough power to run their country, Asia is a different story. ASEAN's a different story. Brazil's a different story. These are highly sophisticated countries growing their economies strongly, right? These are those top growing countries in the world in terms of GDP growth. They have to have this power. to power that AI and to power those data centers. So you got to be looking at all kinds of different options. And again, I think the nearest low hanging, easily to do is the turnkey approach from Russia, right? Is a starting the point. Because the SMRs, for example, are more difficult sale to your population. I mean, I was fortunate enough to meet the Prime Minister of Malaysia a couple of months ago here in London, and he was talking about how it takes the time to start selling people on the concept, convincing them this is different. It's Gen 3, maybe Gen 4, so you're not going to have the issues you heard about previously. But that takes years. Plus, it takes years to get the SMRs fully functional, to build them and make them functional. So you're talking about a 5 to 10 year lag, where an FNPPs are much, much faster and much more near term. So I think it's important to have this conversation, which is why I reached out to you and said we should talk about this, because people need to understand that and the needs keep getting greater. They're not getting worse, as you could see from all the press that you read. But here's at least one win-win for countries already in this space. And rest again,
How are they able to move so fast, though, the Russians? I know, obviously, they have all these nuclear competencies. They kind of cornered the market with their turnkey solutions and dominance in all areas of it. But to what extent has, I guess, the Arctic been this? Has it been an important venue for introducing a lot of these floating nuclear power plants?
That's a very good point. So my first piece on Arctic shipping was 2018 and talked about this. So as you probably know, Russia has a full fleet of Arctic nuclear icebreakers, right? It has that for years. So and in fact, that's where the capabilities, the RTM functions are coming from, that nuclear capability to these FNPPs. It's off that. But this goes back to Russia back in the 50s and 60s. They've been developing nuclear power for a much, much longer period of time than people really paid attention to. So there are a number of these countries you're talking about now where they're actually building FNPPs in Africa or in that Southeast Asia, where they've been in discussions since the 60s and 70s. It's just been blocked for various reasons. Now, for each, as I said, each area is different, but certainly ASEAN, to drive this, the economic growth and data centers and power, they must drive this. So again, a turnkey solution with someone who's done it for 40 or 50 years. Yes, we're the market leader. You're never gonna have a problem, working with the world leader, despite geopolitics.
Well, you mentioned a few, geographical regions, Southeast Asia, Africa, that there's a lot of areas where there's this huge demand now for energy as their economies are moving forward. But Central Asia as well is I guess, a strategic region as well. And in my opinion, no other economy in Central Asia now is more impressive than Uzbekistan, with very impressive, not just economic growth, but also a very stable economic foundation for this as it develops. What kind of role does this play in, I guess, the global expanding nuclear markets?
That's another excellent question. I'm a huge supporter of Uzbekistan. I know the ambassador and team here in the UK very well. I spent my summer holiday last year in Uzbekistan and published a series of publications on energy and transportation in Uzbekistan. And I hope to be the speaker on this at the end of November in Turkey about this. Yes, Uzbekistan seems to be taking on the role of the central hub, the nuclear hub for Central Asia. So this was what of note this year is this is the first time Russia has gone from offshore FNPPs to onshore small modular reactors. So number one is they've gone from saying we'll go from the first discussion was we do 6 SMRs at 55 megawatts each to build the power base of in Tashkent, to now expand that to a smaller number of SMRs, but 2 nuclear power plants. So this is part of the story about building relationships. So they're actually going to build 2.4 gigs of power in these nuclear power plants in Uzbekistan, which again, the centerpiece of that. But that's not alone. So if you look, and of course that's along the CKU rail, as you know, corridor, which is quite important to transport oil from Iran to China. That CKU corridor, rail corridor. So not only is that important from a nuclear power base, but also Kazakhstan has recently chosen to build new nuclear power plants. One goes to Russia, one goes to China, and there's a third in discussions that goes to some party in the West. But that gives you nuclear power to the north of Uzbekistan. And then there's discussion already about, has been discussion for a while, on Kyrgyzstan. So there's your CKU literally being built from a nuclear central hub as well, not just a rail hub or transportation hub. So this is, it's unusual in lots of different ways because it's been done really well from Russia point of view of these small, if you will, the FNPPs to the SMRs to the major, yes, nuclear power plants. So, and as I said, I'm taking my hat off to how fast Uzbekistan has moved so quickly. In nuclear here, this is the case, but I'd say outside of nuclear, they've also done a great job in solar and wind, and that's been led by the Gulf. Saudi, Aqua and Masdar have been major players, and we work with those companies, and these are outstanding companies to help them build renewables. To go from 0.1% to 30% in 10 years is extraordinary. And nuclear is just a piece of that.
Well, in this, I guess, changing of the whole nuclear landscape in the world, you do have, you do need some cooperation, it seems, between China and Russia. Again, this is my main area of interest as well, the economic cooperation between China and Russia. For Russia, of course, this is very important as it seeks to reorient its economy away from the West, and for the Chinese as well, in the the efforts to integrate more with the wider Eurasian continent. Russia becomes an indispensable partner. So this China-Russia partnership, for the Russians call it Greater Eurasia, it's really at the center. So, and also in the nuclear area, it seems that they could complement each other quite well. That is, Russia dominating to a large extent the international nuclear market, but the Chinese are coming up with some very impressive technologies. As we discussed last time, the thorium plants, where I think they could develop now some of these plants 60,000 years of energy, cheap energy, very cheap, but also clean, so it wouldn't have this nuclear waste. How do you see this partnership between China and Russia developing, possibly in the nuclear market as well?
It started officially unfolding in 2016. And there's been all kinds of discussions about how many floating FNPPs would be done between the two countries over the last several years. What has always happened to date is that Russia has deferred to China to build the hulls for several of these, if you will, for Russia purposes. Although there's all kinds of discussions about what Russia could do in building floating nuclear power plants for China. You will appreciate that there are countries in Asia and in North America that are petrified of Russian FNPPs in the South China Sea. Yes, and given the fact that these guys are so far ahead of the rest of the competitors, China has been slow to push the trigger to if you will, take the that technology and distribute it around the South China Sea. But yes, the partnership exists. So far, it's been China assisting in construction. Yes, I'm sure there's more sharing in the thorium side. As I mentioned before, that Russia is now helping India with a thorium SMR. I'm sure China has something to do with that as their partners together. And I'm sure, and I mentioned before how China and Russia are actually the first two, each one, the large nuclear power plants in Kazakhstan, side by side. So there's a lot of collaboration between the two parties. And I think it's only a matter of time before the FNPPs from Russia find their way into China along the coast of China. I've already mentioned they're already going along the coast of Vietnam, Malaysia, yes, Indonesia. So they're finding their way to South Asia already. I think it's just been, China has not really pushed any buttons they were at one time, even up to a few years ago, talking about doing 20 or 30 of these themselves in the South China Sea, but they've not pushed the button on that yet. I can understand why. But yes, the collaboration, I would consider this happening on and on. It's more than that, right? It's also collaboration in science. It's broader. It's certainly nuclear collaboration between the two parties. It's also broader in all sense of science. You'll notice that if you look closer of the area and that combined area of Dalian where Dalian comes across, if you will, to Russia, there's a new science that was being built there between the two organizations, because the two countries are really driven by science, not by legal or politics or diplomacy. They're driven by science. So it's not surprising. I expect more joint developments among both countries. I think 2 years also trust each other and get along together. That helps a lot.
Yeah, well, it seems somewhat similar to the technological sovereignty that the Russians and Chinese are building in the digital sphere, because the main objective appears to be to have national control over strategic industries or critical industries within digital technology. So they both have this more or less independent ecosystem. Obviously, the Chinese are well ahead with the more advanced technologies, but still, the Russians seek also to have complete autonomy, that is its own digital platforms. But in areas where it's lacking the technologies, it seems to prefer joint ventures with the Chinese, but then do 51-49 splits in order to still maintain national control, but then using China as its ideal or privileged partner. And this is a shift away from, of course, the historical partnership with the West, because usually when the Russians had some technological projects, but also when it was for developing the Arctic or anything along the strategic industries, it always had Western countries as key partners. But these days, when Russia's Greater Europe initiative has been replaced with Greater Eurasia, you now see this flip where China appears to be always first on this list. I guess that also makes sense given its technological leap and continuing to race forward. But it does beg the question, where is the West now on this? Because you mentioned the Russians, making these huge leaps ahead, but also the Chinese being in a big rush to develop these technologies for a world that is very hungry for cheap energy. Do we have any similar developments in the West? I mean, is there any competition the West can put up against the Russians and the Chinese?
I think the most near-term one I can think of is in Thailand, where there's an FNNP or SMR decision pending, but that would involve, it appears to be Korea and or a Danish company in terms of floating nuclear power. That's over the near term. I spent one day last week at the European FNNP conference for shipping. I have to say that hats off to Mikhail Bo, who runs Core Power, and to his efforts to try and bring the West together to say, we need to do something here. He puts a lot of time and effort into it. He has a lot of partners in Japan, Korea, and the USA to try and bring this together, because at the end of the day, it is one people, one planet. So, but he's charged with something very difficult, because there are a lot of people who sit on those panels that are not like the guys that we talked about before in the thorium in China, which are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 4 years, 400 of them. That's not what you hear when you sit. That's not what you see when you sit and watch these panels. It's a much slower. I need to do this, but especially when you have so many leaders from the West actually not believing in this, right? You can imagine it's difficult to win these over. And plus, there's not much press. I mean, I'm delighted to see that the the UK press has finally mentioned the Russians, 20 countries out of the 54 countries, in an analysis, but there's no analysis, pictures, basically, right? It's not discussing how they're actually turnkey, uranium, yes, mining, uranium enrichment, data centers, power for the country, education, none of that's in there. At least they're starting to mention that actually Russia is actually making progress in these countries. So it's a start, which is, I think, one of the reasons you do this better than much better than I do. If you look at the BRICS, how one of the keys takeaway at the BRICS is, you should talk to Pepe if you haven't already, is the building of some mechanism to get media in those countries out, because it's not getting out in Western media. So it's a start, but it's just not there. It's really different. I mean, I'm always looking back. I love sport, as you probably know, and I'm looking back at its different sports figures of these pep talks and the people that they make, and I've listened to the words that they say from Western perspective, and what I see in life, there's a huge gap between the two. Without just being kind about it, but I think there's no real driver in the West, and there's no real investment. I feel like this is so important because at least you're getting messages out to people, and the world is moving very, very fast. And so, things like this are quite important to get the message across. And to be fair, the people that run these things at these big Western companies, or the militaries in these companies, I avoid the military. I don't like it and stay away from it, but are aware of all this. But it's, for whatever reason, it takes a longer time to get through because the press just doesn't want to deal with it. The whole concept of saying something that's reasonable or intelligent or quite well planned, or about a marketing strategy, which is like a JP Morgan, that's just, people will never say that. I mean, I spent 20 years in the bank, 30 years in large banks. It's a very clever strategy. You lead with credit, just like Goldman, and also China did in the BRI. So, Putin's a very clever man, but no one wants to hear this, as you already know.
Well, but do you know why? Is it just it's not popular to report on a game we're losing in, or is it a narrative issue, or what explains the lack of interest? Is it is the technological knowledge around this, it's just, it looks to me that in this race, it would be, there should be more interest from the media, but also yeah, I mean, it's very happy for China and Russia that they're making such advances, but it would be good for the international economy to have a bit more of a balance, that is not to fall too far behind, which, yeah, I guess is a second question. There is, how much, what do you make of the gap anyways? Is it increasing between us, or is it yeah, more or less stable?
Gosh, let's answer that in several different ways. First of all, again, with Chatham House, you can't talk about names. There was one person last week kind of cheering people on. You should do this. You should move forward, like a college, university, or pro coach would do. I would never see Pep Guardiola say those words, or someone who runs PSG, but it's almost coaching. Please try. It sounds bizarre, but it's true. Then I try to juxtapose that with what we said last time with the thorium, with the man running the thorium program in China, saying it's like a rabbit that's of either lazy or fat or whatever, and suddenly the tortoise takes it over, right? So I look at the two different mechanisms talking about that, but there is a difference. Some people are listening. I give full marks. Both Tony Blair and Ed Miliband both have visited China, and have both been impressed at that gap you're talking about, and how it's widening that gap. And I think that educating them and showing them how far China is ahead has actually helped Miliband and the Starmer government to move forward on the SMRs. And I think so if a Blair or Miliband says this is really positive stuff, I need you to understand this, it at least gets the message across. Although that's not plastered across newspapers. That's from things I listen to privately. Yes. So it's just not, the messages aren't going out. They don't want to go out. As we say in the UK, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? We just killed an X-linked program that could have linked us for 9 million homes in this country with green energy. Killed it for Morocco. That'll probably go to Germany, but we killed it in this country. So it is what it is. People just don't see the urgency. And I'm not sure when they do, but I do want to keep reporting to you, like here's the FNNP developments. It's not just Africa, it's Southeast Asia. It's Latin America with Brazil. It's actually thorium now with Brazil. It's thorium now with India. It's moving. This is all moving very, very quickly. This is, you and I first spoke on early May. It's only 2 months later. Look at these developments. It's quite incredible. Yes, and as long as we keep telling people, here's what's happening and reporting back, at least it gets the message out. Maybe it gets through. So you have a lot of subscribers and I have a lot of data. So I'm happy to share my data with your subscribers. So I think we keep doing it to get the message across. And the more specific I can be in terms of transactions, I mean, I was involved in one of those African countries for a number of months. And I kept saying why we weren't trying to find a Western party here, because it's only a matter of time before they do a turnkey with Russia. And of course, they chose a turnkey with Russia. And why wouldn't they? Because it applies all those things we just talked about, plus language skills, plus language training. Yes, it's an entirely comprehensive program.
Well, it takes me to my last question, because it does seem, historical truth is, at least since the Industrial Revolution, the reality is if you have access to cheap, reliable energy, then this is really the driving force of economic growth. I mean, this is what most geopolitical competition has since been over as well. So again, I know that your focus is mostly on the actual markets, the technologies, but do you see what is the geopolitical or the geoeconomic consequences of this massive leap which you're seeing in the nuclear field by the Russians and the Chinese? Well, do you see? Can you speak to this?
I'm not a politician, thank goodness, and I won't want to be a politician. But I think it's fair to say that when Marco Rubio says the future growth of the world is in Asia, 2/3 of the next 10 years growth is in Asia, they get it. The U.S. government gets it. He wouldn't make that statement if he didn't mean it, because he's quite a smart guy. But whether you can actually, that's another story. I mean, you have to look at, I would look you look at capital flows into certain campaigns, and you might find they might not necessarily like that concept, right? I mean, longer term, there's as you well know, there's a whole world being built around outside with their own trade flows. Yes, or their own currencies around this, and so people, I think, see where the world's going. It's just there's a reason it can't get out. So people like you and what you do with people you have on your programs and your podcasts are help educate people, because and add throw Pepe in there when you have a chance to, as well as the other people you have, to actually report on this. It's the only message that you're the only ways to get this out, because we're not going to get it. My piece I did a year ago on Laos, because Asia Investment Research looks at each country and looks at the delta of the energy transition last 12 months and next 12 months. And Laos is 62% already hydro, renewables. And they provide enough power. A country with 8 million people provides enough power to power 200 million people economies in Asia. Incredible. Low cost, low energy power, right? Low cost green energy power. And so I asked my publicist in the UK to get this out in the UK, because it's obviously read in Asia. They said we can't do that because we were told it makes us look bad and makes them look good. So as long as that happens, we need people like you and others to get these messages out.
Well, Henry, thank you so much for your time. I hope to have you back here, and also, to meet you again in person, maybe Budapest. So thanks again.
Or else in Turkey in November. That'd be interesting as well, because I want them to cover the whole rebirth of Samarkand, which is one of the world's wealthiest cities, 500 BC, and now I wouldn't underestimate whether this is going to be 10 or 20 years from now as the center of the Silk Road, and of course the north-south, as you probably know. Anyway, we'll stay in touch. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Thank you.